Good morning, everyone. I'm Ariella Wagner, founder of SunRay Construction Solutions, and we have another fabulous webinar conducted by board-certified construction attorney Alex Barthet. Today, we are going to discuss do this one thing before you sign that next release. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alex Barthet.
Thanks, Ariella. My name is Alex Barthet. I am a board-certified construction attorney. We handle construction cases throughout the state. And today we're going to talk about lien releases generally and the one thing you need to know before you sign that next release. So let's go ahead and get started. So on today's agenda, we're going to talk about releases generally and the various forms that they come in. We'll talk about the one thing you need to always be careful about when you sign a release. And we'll also talk about conditional releases because that comes up all the time. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And those questions you can ask right in the chat box on the right-hand side, the Go to Webinar pop-up. You can put in your question. We'll answer them all at the end. Make sure not to include any names of companies or people in your questions, please. So let's get started. Let's talk about the release forms that typically exist on a project. So the forms that are floating around really depend on who you're contracting with and where you fall in the construction process. So if you're a GC, the form that you're going to use with your subs is going to be different than if you're a sub and the form that you'd like to give to your GC. And we're going to talk about those. What you want to keep in mind is, generally speaking, you want to give the narrowest release possible when you get a check, and you want to get a broad release when you give a check. And I'm going to describe in more detail what narrow and broad mean, but in essence, understand that you have lots of rights as you perform construction work. And the release is intended to release those rights, typically through a period of time. Now, you can release some of your rights, a lot of your rights, or all of your rights. So when you release just a few of your rights, that would be considered a narrow release. And when you release lots of your rights or all of your rights, that's a broad release. So as an example, when you're a contractor and you're giving a sub a check, you want to make sure that you get the broadest release possible. You don't want the sub to come back later and say, yeah, I gave you a lien release, but I have all of these delay claims and extended general condition claims that I never released every month. You want to make sure that when you give a check during that month that those claims are released. And the converse is true for a sub. You want to make sure that if you can give the amount of right every time you get a check, that's what you do. So let's take a look at what is considered the default release, which is the release that's found in Florida Statute Chapter 713. So here is the release form that is in Chapter 713. This is the partial release and waiver form. And notice that it has two spots that are most important. So number one is the amount of money that you're getting. And number two is the date that the release is effective through. Now, if we compare that to a final release, so let's take a look at the 713 final release form. You'll notice that it has, it's very similar, except it only has one spot. It doesn't have a through date. It only has the date where you are going to put in the amount of money that you are getting. The reason is that it's effective on the day that you execute it. So the final release is intended to be effective of releasing all of your rights for that amount of money through the date that you sign it. Now, 713 releases, the statutory release forms, are forms of release that only release lien rights. So let's take a look at another release. And as you can tell already, it's already much longer than the other forms, and we're going to walk through this so you understand where the major differences are. So number one is that this release says $10. Generally speaking, the fact that a release says $10 is fine. It is still an enforceable release, even though it says $10, so that's okay. But as a contractor or anyone that is giving checks and getting releases, you want to make sure that you use $10 if you could. Now, if you are getting a check and giving a release, you'd like to list the amount of money that you're getting. The reason that that's important is because you want to make sure that no one can argue later that you gave up more rights for less money. And again, I'll explain what that means in a little more detail. So the real crux of this release is in the additional items that are being released. So if you look at what's getting released, it says that in consideration of the amount above, that the undersigned releases its lien rights, as well as any claims, change orders, works, materials, delays, fees, costs, losses, expenses, damages, or sums for the labor, services, and materials furnished for the improvements. So notice that the string of items that are being released is much longer than in a normal release, a statutory release. So what does this mean? This means that if you sign a release that looks like this, and most general contractor and owner releases are like this because they want you to give up all of your rights, you are giving up any claims for additional fees for changes, for change orders that may not be executed, for possible delay claims, extended overhead that you may want to argue about later. So understand that this broader release is giving up a lot more rights. So you need to read the releases before you sign them and know what you're giving up. It also has a through date, just like the other releases, because this is a progress release. So it has the date that you're releasing your rights through. So if you agree to a form of a release in your contract, or the contract says something like you agree to a form that that we may give you later, so you agree to sign the form that's acceptable to us, then you may be bound to use that form later. So understand that when you negotiate your contract with an owner or contractor, or even as a sub with a sub, that the form of release that's attached as an exhibit to the contract, you need to look at that as well. So not only the terms and conditions, not only the scope of work, but all of the exhibits, which include the release forms. So if you don't like the release forms that are part of the contract, you need to modify them at the time of the contract, because if not, then you won't be able to argue later that, well, I don't want to sign a release in this form because I have other claims that I want to assert, so I'm not willing to release them. But if you sign a contract that says that you will use that form, then you have to. So let's talk about the one thing that you need to do with every release, no matter what. And that is, you need to absolutely positively match the through date with the dollars that you are getting. Every progress release has an amount of money that's being presented and a through date that the release is effective through. You need to understand that the through date is the effective date of the release. It's not the amount of money. We have lots of clients that tell us, no, it's okay. I know that I'm expecting a $50,000 check and they're only paying me $40,000, but I submitted it with my pay app that says $50,000. So even though I signed the release through the end of the month and I got a check for $40,000, I'm still entitled to the $10,000. And that is not true. The effective date of the release, what is going to govern between the amount of money and the date, the through date, is the through date. So if you look at a release that you're being asked to sign and you're expecting a $50,000 check to get you to the end of the month, and they are only giving you a $40,000 check, you have two options. Option one is to change the date of the release. So, well, if 50 got me to the end of the month, and I look at my invoices and my billings, 40,000 gets me to the 22nd of the month. So you need to change the through date to the 22nd of the month. Alternatively, if you're not going to change the through date, then you need to change everything so that you get the $50,000. Because if you're not going to get $50,000 to the end of the month and you sign a release with a through date through the end of the month, you will lose all of your rights and your lien rights through the through date. So again, remember, as between the through date and the dollars, it's the through date that matters most. So let's talk about conditional releases, because this is a question that comes up on a very regular basis. A conditional release is any release that is conditioned on actually receiving the money that you're expecting. So let's take a look at a sample language that you can include in any release. You can handwrite it. You can type it in. It doesn't matter as long as it's in there. And it says, notwithstanding anything to the contrary, this waiver and release is conditioned upon and not effective until the undersigned receives paid funds of, and there's a blank. So if you're expecting a $50,000 check and you provide a release in advance of getting the money, if you put this language in and say $50,000 in that blank, then until you get the $50,000, that release is not effective. You have to be careful for releases that are titled conditional, but when you read the document, they are in fact not conditional. So the title of the document by itself does not govern how it works. What matters is what's in the body of the document. So we have seen releases that are titled conditional releases, but when you read them, they're not conditional at all. So you need to make sure that you read them and it has language that is expressly conditioned, that expressly conditions the release on you receiving the money that you are expecting. Know that under no circumstances can you have a conditional release for $10, unless in fact you're only expecting $10. But if you're expecting a $20,000 check and it's a conditional release, but the condition of the release is that that you get paid the amount that's in the release and it only says $10, well, then that's not a good conditional release, because it's only conditioned on you actually getting $10. As a general contractor, you need to watch out for conditional releases from your subs or suppliers to your subs. And the reason is that as a GC, you can accept a conditional release from your direct subs and direct vendors because you're controlling the condition. You are writing them a check and they're giving you a release, so you know the condition is satisfied. But if you're the general contractor and you hire an electrician and the electrician has an electrical supply house and they give you conditional release with the electrician's release, if you give the electrician the money and the electrician does not give the money to the supply house, you're holding a release that's conditioned on the supply house getting the money, but you don't know that they ever got the money. So you may find yourself in a position where you've given the money expecting it to get to the supply house. It doesn't get there. You look at your release, it's conditioned, so it has no force and effect in your favor. And now you may have to pay twice. So the project may get liened, and the owner is going to expect you to bond it off. You may have a bond on the job. So as a result, you need to deal with that and probably have to pay twice, because the supply house has all the rights to make a claim on your bond or lien the project until they get an effective release. And a conditional release that doesn't have the condition satisfied by them getting the money is no good. So be very careful about that. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and send them through. And while we wait for your questions, Ariella is going to talk about the SunRay release system.
Thank you very much, Alex. The SunRay system is absolutely fabulous because you can create all of the statutory all of these forms, the statutory forms, are already in the SunRay system for you. So the language that he's speaking about, your final releases, your conditional releases of liens, all of the statutory wording is already in place for you. Again, all of your releases can be stored online, and this is absolutely fabulous. So if you have a project and you're working on it for hypothetically a year and a half, you can store all of your partial releases online that are signed and notarized, so you can go back and see what you were giving the general contractor and or the subcontractor or even the owner of the property. Those all can be it's very easy to access. And if you're using the SunRay system, you can do all of your releases of liens for free. It's absolutely fabulous. You can just put the through date, the accurate through date, and it will take you no more than 2 minutes to populate the form. And the legal description is there for you already. The owner is there for you already. And it also has the ability, you'll have one in a PDF, one in a Word once you create it in our system, and you can even modify it if necessary. And the final piece is here is you can add your logo and personalize your own releases of liens. So that's the SunRay releases of lien system for you. Contains all those fabulous features. So here's a little screenshot. Managing your releases. You have your conditional waiver and release of final payment, the conditional waiver and release on your progress payment, your unconditional waiver and release of final payment, and your unconditional waiver and release on progress payment. So again, all could be done through the system. And as I was explaining to you, everything can be stored. If you can see here, you have the ability to see a PDF on that fourth section under actions. It's a PDF and a Word. If you make a mistake, you can delete it. And then you can upload all of your releases of liens right into the system where it says upload new document.
Ariella, do we have any questions?
I'm going to see right now. It appears that you did such a brilliant job that everyone is now an expert on waiver and releases. But if anyone does happen to have any questions, even though we're on a webinar and you're nervous, please feel free. We're going to have the final screen with our contact information. Feel free to send us an email or feel free to give us a call.
If you want to calculate your lien and notice deadlines, we have an app for that. It's called the Calculien. You can search the lien zone in the App Store or point your camera at either of those QR codes on either the App Store or the Google Play Store. And you can download the app. It'll calculate the 45 days and the 90 days for each of your notice to owner and lien and bond deadlines. And we have some other upcoming seminars. We have a live seminar in Naples on April 27th. It's a deep dive into liens, bonds, and contracts. It goes from 8 to 11, and that's in Naples on April 27th. And then the next webinar, we do this once a month, and it is on April 19th from 9 to 9:20, and it's titled Personal Guarantees and Other Ways to Get Paid. You can sign up at sunraynotice.com/education. Here is our contact information if you want to send us an email with any questions that you have. Again, thank you, Ariella, and everybody, thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this useful, and I hope to see you all next month.
Thank you, and I hope everyone has a fabulous day.